"I speak 6 languages," said the black girl proudly. The millionaire laughs, but ends up in shock. A 12-year-old black girl named Zara stood at the gates of Whitmore Academy, the most exclusive private school in Manhattan, clutching her worn backpack and looking up at buildings that cost more to maintain than most families earned in a lifetime. She had won a full scholarship through a program designed to bring diversity to an institution where diversity meant students whose trust funds were merely in the millions rather than billions. As Zara walked through corridors lined with portraits of distinguished alumni, all white, all male, all radiating the confidence that comes from never having been told they don't belong, she could feel curious stares following her every step. Today was her first day, and she was about to meet classmates who had never encountered someone who looked like her, much less someone whose presence would challenge everything they thought they knew about intelligence, privilege, and what it truly meant to be exceptional. The morning began in AP European history, where Zara took a seat in the back row, hoping to observe the classroom dynamics before drawing attention to herself. The teacher, Dr. Whitman, was discussing the Renaissance when he posed a question about the influence of trade routes on cultural exchange. Several hands shot up, mostly belonging to students whose family names adorned buildings around the city. But Dr. Whitman's gaze landed on Zara with the particular attention that teachers pay to new students. "Miss Johnson," he said, consulting his roster, "perhaps you'd like to contribute to our discussion?" The question felt like a test, and Zara could sense her classmates turning to watch her response, their expressions ranging from curious to skeptical to openly dismissive. "The Silk Road wasn't just about moving goods," Zara said, her voice steady despite the weight of 20 pairs of eyes focused on her. "It was about moving ideas, languages, and technologies. When merchants traveled from Venice to Constantinople, they weren't just carrying spices. They were carrying mathematical concepts from India, astronomical knowledge from Persia, and linguistic innovations that would reshape European scholarship." Dr. Whitman nodded approvingly, but Zara could hear whispers behind her, fragments of conversation that suggested her classmates were surprised by the depth of her knowledge. She had expected this reaction, had prepared for it during the long summer months when she studied not just to keep up, but to excel in an environment where academic mediocrity would be interpreted as confirmation of racist expectations. Behind Zara sat Marcus Whitmore Jr., the 16-year-old heir to a pharmaceutical fortune whose family had attended Whitmore Academy for 4 generations. Marcus had never met a scholarship student before, and certainly not one who seemed to understand European history better than students who had visited those Renaissance cities on family vacations. "How does she know all that?" he whispered to his friend Connor, not bothering to lower his voice enough to avoid Zara's hearing. "I thought these diversity kids were here for sports or music or whatever." The casual dismissal of her academic abilities, the assumption that she must have been admitted for reasons other than intellectual merit, was exactly what Zara had expected, but still stung with its predictable cruelty. During lunch, Zara sat alone at a corner table, reading a book in what appeared to be Arabic while eating a sandwich she had packed from home. A stark contrast to her classmates' catered meals from the Academy's 5-star dining service. The isolation wasn't entirely unwelcome. She had learned early that being underestimated was sometimes an advantage, that letting people assume limitations could create opportunities for surprise that might serve her well in this new environment. She was fluent in 6 languages: English, Spanish, Arabic, French, Mandarin, and Portuguese, a skill set she had developed not through expensive tutors, but through necessity, growing up in a neighborhood where linguistic diversity was essential for navigation and survival. The moment that would change everything came during afternoon break, when Marcus approached Zara's table with the swagger of someone accustomed to being the center of attention wherever he went. His friends flanked him like an entourage, clearly expecting entertainment from whatever interaction was about to unfold. "So," Marcus said, his voice carrying across the dining hall, "I heard you're some kind of scholarship student. What's your special talent? Basketball? Singing?" The questions were loaded with assumptions that made other students turn to watch, sensing drama in the way that teenagers always do when social hierarchies are about to be tested or reinforced. Zara looked up from her book, her expression calm but alert, recognizing this as a defining moment that would establish her place in this school's social ecosystem. "I speak 6 languages," Zara said simply, closing her book and giving Marcus her full attention. The statement was delivered without boasting or defensiveness, just a straightforward answer to his question about her abilities. Marcus's reaction was immediate and predictable. He threw back his head and laughed, a sound that carried such genuine amusement that conversations throughout the dining hall paused as other students turned to see what was so funny. 6 languages? Marcus repeated, his voice pitched loud enough for maximum audience. "Right. Let me guess, English, Spanish, and maybe you count Ebonics as 3 separate languages?" The racist joke drew uncomfortable laughter from some students, while others shifted uneasily, recognizing that Marcus had crossed a line even by the relaxed standards of privilege that governed their social interactions. Zara felt familiar heat rise in her chest, the anger that came from being mocked for achievements that had required years of dedication and sacrifice to develop. But she had learned to channel that anger into precision rather than explosion, to use skepticism as fuel for demonstrations that left doubters speechless. "Would you like me to prove it?" she asked, her voice carrying a challenge that made Marcus's grin falter slightly, though his confidence remained intact. "Sure," he said, spreading his arms wide in a gesture that invited the entire dining hall to witness his entertainment. "Go ahead and prove you speak 6 languages. This should be good." Zara stood up, her posture straight and confident as she prepared to deliver a performance that would reshape every assumption in the room. She began in Spanish, her pronunciation crisp and fluent as she said, "I'm going to demonstrate something about assumptions and ignorance for those who think scholarship students don't belong here." She seamlessly transitioned into French. "Intelligence isn't determined by the size of your trust fund or the length of your family's legacy at this institution." Her Mandarin was equally flawless as she continued, "Some of us earned our place here through merit rather than inheritance." The Arabic that followed was spoken with the confidence of someone who had studied not just the language, but the culture it represented. Education should create wisdom, not perpetuate ignorance. Portuguese completed her demonstration, but apparently some people need to learn that lesson the hard way. The dining hall had fallen completely silent. Every conversation stopped as students processed what they had just witnessed. Marcus's face had progressed through several expressions: skepticism, surprise, discomfort, and finally something approaching shock as he realized that his casual mockery had been answered with a display of intellectual capability that surpassed anything he could have imagined from someone he had automatically assumed was intellectually inferior. Dr. Whitman, who had been eating lunch at the faculty table, approached with obvious interest. "Miss Johnson," he said, "that was extraordinary. Where did you learn such fluent command of so many languages?" Zara's response revealed a backstory that shattered every assumption her classmates had made about scholarship students and the circumstances that brought them to elite institutions. "My mother cleans offices in the United Nations building," she said, her voice carrying pride rather than shame about her family circumstances. "She started taking me to work with her when I was 8, during school breaks when she couldn't afford childcare. I would sit in empty conference rooms and listen to interpreters practice, and some of them started teaching me phrases, then sentences, then full conversations. They said I had a gift for language, that I could hear distinctions in pronunciation that most people miss. The revelation that her linguistic abilities have been developed not through expensive instruction, but through curiosity and opportunity, created in unexpected places left her audience speechless, forcing them to reconsider their assumptions about where excellence comes from and who deserves recognition for exceptional achievement. Marcus's recovery from his initial shock took several minutes, during which his friends looked between him and Zara with expressions that suggested the social dynamics they thought they understood were shifting in ways they couldn't predict or control. When he finally spoke, his voice had lost its mocking tone but retained the defensive edge of someone whose worldview was being challenged. "Okay, so maybe you can speak some languages," he said, "but that doesn't make you smart. Anyone can memorize phrases and pronunciation. Real intelligence is about analysis, critical thinking, problem-solving, things that matter in the business world. His pivot revealed the depth of his need to maintain superiority, to find some arena where his advantages would remain unquestioned despite evidence that challenged his assumptions about intellectual capacity and academic achievement. Dr. Whitman, who had been listening to this exchange with growing fascination, saw an opportunity to turn this confrontation into a teachable moment that could benefit the entire student body. "That's an interesting point, Marcus," he said diplomatically. "Perhaps we could test that theory. Miss Johnson, would you be willing to engage in a brief academic discussion with Marcus? Something that demonstrates analytical thinking rather than just linguistic ability." Zara recognized the trap inherent in the suggestion. If she declined, it would seem like admission that Marcus was right about her limitations. But if she accepted, she would be putting herself in direct intellectual competition with someone whose family had provided him with every educational advantage money could buy. "What subject would you prefer?" Zara asked Marcus, her tone suggesting she was confident in any academic arena he might choose. Marcus consulted quickly with his friends, then answered with obvious satisfaction. "International economics. My family's business operates in 12 countries, so I've been studying global markets since I was 10. The choice was strategic. Economics combined mathematical analysis with cultural understanding, requiring both technical knowledge and broader comprehension of how different systems interact." Marcus clearly believed his family's business connections and expensive tutoring had prepared him for discussions that would expose the limitations of Zara's scholarship-funded education. Dr. Whitman posed a question that would frame their debate. How should developing nations balance economic growth with environmental protection, given the constraints of global competition and domestic poverty? It was the kind of complex, multifaceted question that had no simple answers, requiring students to demonstrate understanding of economics, politics, environmental science, and cultural dynamics simultaneously. Marcus went first, delivering a confident analysis that drew heavily on theories he had learned from his tutors and examples from his family's business operations. His answer was polished, technically accurate, and completely predictable in its emphasis on market-driven solutions that prioritized economic growth over environmental concerns. Zara's response revealed the depth of understanding that comes from lived experience combined with academic study. From seeing global economics from the perspective of someone whose family was directly affected by the policies being discussed rather than merely profiting from them. The question assumes that developing nations have the same choices that wealthy countries had during their industrialization, she began, but that ignores how colonialism and current trade relationships have constrained those options. Her analysis incorporated not just economic theory, but historical context, environmental science, and social justice considerations that Marcus's privileged perspective had never required him to consider. She spoke about microfinance initiatives she had researched, about renewable energy projects in communities similar to her own, about the ways that environmental degradation disproportionately affected poor populations who had the least responsibility for creating climate problems. As Zara continued, weaving together insights from multiple disciplines while drawing on examples from the languages and cultures she had studied, it became clear that her understanding of international economics was not just broader than Marcus's, but fundamentally more sophisticated in its recognition of complexity and nuance. She wasn't just reciting theories she had memorized. She was synthesizing information from multiple sources to create original analysis that impressed even Dr. Whitman with its depth and creativity. Marcus's confidence began to crumble as he realized that his expensive education had provided him with knowledge but not wisdom, with information but not insight, with theories but not understanding of how those theories played out in the real world, where people like Zara's family lived and worked. The debate attracted attention throughout the dining hall as students recognized they were witnessing something unprecedented. A scholarship student, not just holding her own against one of their most privileged classmates, but demonstrating intellectual capabilities that surpassed his despite her obvious disadvantages in resources and preparation. Marcus's increasingly desperate attempts to reassert his superiority only highlighted the gaps in his understanding. The ways his privileged perspective had limited rather than enhanced his ability to think critically about complex global issues. But you're not considering the practical realities of business operations, he insisted, falling back on talking points that sounded impressive but revealed shallow understanding of the topics being discussed. Zara's patience with Marcus's condescension finally reached its limit, and her response carried the steel of someone who had faced underestimation her entire life and learned to transform it into fuel for excellence. "Marcus," she said, her voice cutting through his interruption, "you're talking about practical realities to someone whose mother works 3 jobs to pay rent, who has lived through the practical realities of economic policies that benefit people like your family while creating hardship for people like mine. I don't just study international economics, I live it every day." Her words carried such authentic authority that several students shifted uncomfortably, recognizing that their theoretical knowledge was being confronted by someone whose expertise was grounded in actual experience. Dr. Whitman recognized that this exchange had moved beyond academic debate into something more profound, a confrontation between different forms of knowledge, different ways of understanding the world, different definitions of what constituted real intelligence and valuable insight. "Miss Johnson," he said, "your analysis demonstrates exactly the kind of critical thinking that we hope to develop in all our students. You've shown an ability to synthesize information from multiple disciplines while considering perspectives that are often overlooked in traditional economic discussions." The praise was significant coming from a teacher whose standards were notoriously high, and it clearly carried weight with students who had learned to respect Dr. Whitman's academic judgment. Marcus's final attempt to salvage his dignity revealed the depth of his frustration and the extent to which this encounter had threatened his sense of intellectual superiority. "This is ridiculous," he said, his voice rising with anger that he couldn't quite suppress. "She's just a scholarship kid from the projects. My family built businesses that employ thousands of people, that contribute billions to the economy. What has her family ever contributed to society?" The question crossed a line that made even his friends uncomfortable, revealing ugly prejudices that violated the school's stated commitment to diversity and inclusion while exposing the racist assumptions that had motivated his initial mockery. Zara's response was delivered with quiet dignity that made Marcus's outburst look even more petulant and small-minded. "My mother contributes by working 3 jobs to raise a daughter who earned a full scholarship to this school based on academic merit. She contributes by cleaning the offices where people like your family make decisions that affect millions of lives, by doing essential work that keeps society functioning while being treated as invisible by the people she serves. She contributes by teaching me that intelligence and worth aren't determined by bank account balances, and that the best way to respond to ignorance is with evidence rather than anger." Her words carried such moral authority that the dining hall remained silent for several moments after she finished speaking, students processing the realization that they had witnessed not just academic excellence, but character that surpassed anything they had expected from their new classmate. The confrontation's aftermath rippled through Whitmore Academy's social ecosystem in ways that surprised everyone involved, creating new alliances and challenging established hierarchies that had seemed unshakable just hours earlier. Dr. Whitman approached the headmaster immediately after lunch to discuss Zara's exceptional performance, recommending her for advanced placement in multiple subjects and suggesting that her linguistic abilities could contribute to the school's international studies program in unprecedented ways. "We have a truly remarkable student," he reported, "someone whose intellectual capabilities and cultural knowledge could elevate our entire academic program if we're wise enough to recognize and nurture her potential properly." Meanwhile, Marcus retreated to his dormitory room, his carefully constructed sense of superiority shattered by the realization that someone he had automatically dismissed as inferior had demonstrated intellectual abilities that surpassed his own despite every advantage he had been given. His friends' attempts at consolation only made things worse. Their suggestions that Zara's performance had been lucky or just memorization, ringing false even to them after witnessing her sophisticated analysis and authentic expertise. Connor tried to minimize the situation. "Come on, man. It's just one conversation." Everyone knows you're going to Harvard legacy admission, and she'll probably end up at some state school. But Marcus wasn't convinced, having glimpsed a form of excellence that couldn't be purchased or inherited. The story of Zara's linguistic demonstration and academic performance spread throughout the school with a speed that only teenage gossip networks can achieve, but the reactions were more complex than simple admiration or dismissal. Some students, particularly those who had felt intimidated by the school's competitive atmosphere, found inspiration in her example. Proof that excellence could emerge from unexpected places and that intellectual achievement wasn't limited to those with family legacies and unlimited resources. Others, threatened by the challenge to assumptions they had never questioned, doubled down on prejudices that helped them maintain their sense of superiority despite evidence that contradicted their beliefs. The most significant reaction came from Sarah Chun, a senior whose parents had immigrated from Taiwan and built a successful technology company, making her one of the few non-white students in Zara's year. Sarah approached Zara after classes with obvious excitement. "I heard about what happened at lunch. That was incredible. I wish I had been brave enough to do something like that when I was your age." The conversation that followed revealed that Sarah had faced her own challenges with assumptions and stereotypes, though her family's wealth had provided protections that Zara's scholarship status couldn't offer. "Would you like to study together sometime?" Sarah asked. "I'm working on some international business project for my senior thesis, and your perspectives could be really valuable." The invitation represented more than just academic collaboration. It was an offer of friendship from someone who understood the unique pressures facing minority students in elite institutions, someone who recognized that excellence required support networks and allies willing to challenge systemic biases. Zara accepted gratefully, understanding that Sarah's friendship could provide not just social connection, but strategic advantage in navigating an environment that remained hostile to her presence despite her demonstrated capabilities. As they walked together toward the library, both girls aware that their alliance was being observed and discussed by classmates, Zara felt something she hadn't experienced since arriving at Whitmore Academy: the possibility that she might not have to face these challenges alone. 3 months later, Zara had transformed from a curiosity to a catalyst, her presence forcing the entire Whitmore Academy community to confront uncomfortable truths about privilege, merit, and the assumptions that governed their exclusive world. Her academic performance had been nothing short of extraordinary. Perfect scores in multiple subjects, leadership roles in debate club and Model United Nations, recognition from teachers who had initially doubted whether a scholarship student could handle their rigorous standards. The languages that had once been dismissed as party tricks had become valuable assets that enhanced every project and discussion, allowing her to bring perspectives and sources that enriched her classmates' understanding of global issues. Marcus, meanwhile, had undergone his own transformation, though not in ways he had anticipated or initially welcomed. The shock of being intellectually outclassed by someone he had prejudged as inferior had forced him to examine assumptions he had never questioned, to recognize that his privileges had created blindness rather than insight. His grades had actually improved as he began studying with genuine curiosity rather than just going through motions, and he had started volunteering at community centers where he encountered the kinds of families and circumstances that Zara had described. "I need to apologize," he told her one afternoon, approaching her table in the library where she studied surrounded by books in multiple languages. "Not just for being wrong about your abilities, but for being so ignorant about everything, really." Zara looked up from her Arabic economics textbook, studying Marcus's face for signs of sincerity or manipulation. What she saw was genuine humility, the kind that comes from having core beliefs challenged and found wanting. "Apology accepted," she said simply, then added with a slight smile, "But if you really want to make amends, you could help me with something." She explained that she was organizing a peer tutoring program that would pair students who excelled in different subjects, creating study groups that cross social and economic lines while improving academic outcomes for everyone involved. "Your business knowledge could really help students who are struggling with economics concepts," she suggested. The tutoring program that emerged from their collaboration became one of Whitmore Academy's most successful student initiatives, pairing students based on complementary strengths rather than social connections, and creating academic improvements that impress teachers and administrators alike. Marcus found himself working with students whose backgrounds differed dramatically from his own, learning as much as he taught while discovering that intelligence and insight existed in forms he had never recognized or valued. His partnership with Zara evolved from antagonism through apology into genuine friendship based on mutual respect and shared commitment to using their privileges, hers intellectual, his economic, to create opportunities for others. The most dramatic validation of Zara's impact came during the school's annual academic competition, where teams representing different classes competed in knowledge contests that tested everything from historical analysis to scientific reasoning to cultural literacy. Zara's team, which included Marcus, Sarah, and two other students who had initially been skeptical of her abilities, dominated every category while demonstrating collaborative skills that impressed judges and audience members alike. When they won the overall championship, Zara was asked to speak on behalf of her team, and her words captured the transformation that had occurred not just in her own life, but throughout the school community. "This award represents more than academic achievement," Zara said, holding the trophy while her teammates stood proudly beside her. "It represents what becomes possible when we stop making assumptions about each other based on appearance or background, when we recognize that excellence can come from anywhere and take many different forms." She looked directly at Marcus as she continued. "Some of us learn from books and tutors. Others learn from experience and necessity. Some of us inherit opportunities. Others create them through determination and hard work. But all of us have something valuable to contribute if we're given the chance and treated with respect." The applause that followed was different from the polite acknowledgement that typically greeted student speeches at Whitmore Academy. It carried genuine appreciation for insights that had challenged and changed their community, recognition that this scholarship student had provided education that went far beyond academic subjects to encompass lessons about human worth, intellectual humility, and the dangers of prejudgment. As Zara stood there holding her trophy, surrounded by teammates who had become genuine friends, she realized that her 6 languages had been just the beginning. She had also learned to speak the language of leadership, the language of bridge building, and most importantly, the language of demanding respect while extending grace to those who had initially failed to offer it. If this story moved you, maybe it's the sign you needed today. If it is, subscribe. The girl who had stood alone at the academy gates clutching her warm backpack had not only earned her place among the elite, but had redefined what elite actually meant, proving that true distinction comes not from inherited advantages, but from the courage to excel despite obstacles, the wisdom to teach while learning, and the grace to lift others up while climbing toward your own dreams.